And at that point, when they started proceeding down Elm Street, shots started being fired from behind, and I assumed that it was Mr. Nicoletti because he was the one who was in the building, and I knew that Johnny Roselli was there. And I remember the shots ringing out, and even though the president was being hit with the rounds, I was considering it a miss because I knew that we were going for a headshot on the president. And I had known he had been hit in the body, but I didn't know what part at that time. And I seen the body lurch, and I saw the body lurch again. I heard another shot that missed, and we were supposed to hit no one but Conley. I mean, no one but Mr. Kennedy. And I guess Governor Conley got hit with one of the rounds at that point. And I wasn't even sure there because I was keeping Kennedy as best I could in the scope on the fireball. And when I got to the point where I thought it would be the last field of fire, I had zeroed in to the left side of the head there that I had, because if I waited any longer, then Jacqueline Kennedy would have been in the line of fire. And I had been instructed for nothing to happen to her. And at that moment, I figured this is my last chance for a shot, and he still had not been hit in the head. So as I fired that round, Mr. Nicoletti and I had fired approximately at the same time as the hit started forward, then it went backward. And when I would have to say that his shell struck approximately 1,000th of a second ahead of mine, maybe, that's what started pushing the head forward, which caused me to miss in the left eye, and I came in on the left side of the temple.
Hi, my name is Jerry Kroth, and I am a professor at Santa Clara University. And this is a special presentation on the Kennedy assassination. This video podcast that I'm making here, this lecture, is not about this book. This is an introduction. I wrote a book in 2003 called Conspiracy in Camelot, The Complete History of the Assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And the nature of this book was very encyclopedic. It was an academic book. It had 800 footnotes. It looked at the entire aspect of the Kennedy assassination through all sorts of different prisms. The Warren Commission case against Oswald was entirely presented. The case against that, or the case for reasonable doubt, was presented. The mafia theory, the CIA theory, pros and cons of each theory, the anti-Castro Cuban theory, the communist conspiracy. All of that was presented, and it was intended to be as thorough and complete as possible. When we talked about the cover-up, there were 64 incidents reported in the literature about cover-up, destruction of documents, and so forth. When we talked about the CIA theory of the assassination, there were 47 names that were mentioned. They couldn't all have been involved, but that's what the literature basically reported. When we looked at the mafia theory, there were 82 people, from Needle Nose Labriola to Muggsy Tortorella, and all of these names appeared in the literature. When we looked at JFK's mistresses, oh my God, that was just astonishing. There were 33 reported liaisons in 33 months in the White House. Not all of these were corroborated. They're mentioned in the literature, but many of them are, and they were not one-night stands. Mimi Beardsley, for example, was with Kennedy for almost a year. Mary Pinchot Meyer for at least 6 months. And they wrote books about it. So Judith Exner Campbell, the Mafia Mall, she called herself. Fiddle and Faddle, what the Secret Service referred to them as. And these many of these liaisons lasted through the entirety of his White House years. If you looked at Kennedy from the point of view of modern psychological diagnosis today, it's very likely he would have been a very good candidate for what is called hypersexual disorder. Imagine the President of the United States with a mental disorder. So I made a lecture about that book, and about 20,000 people watched it. And some people said, you know, Dr. Kroth, Oswald did it, period, and you need to take your meds. But other people said, thanks for a very professional presentation and all the theories, we appreciate that, but how about, why don't you write a book on the best theory, the most plausible, the most rational explanation other than the Warren Commission report? Why don't you put together the best theory? And that's exactly what this is about. This is a new book that is just out in this September. it is for the 50th anniversary, and it is a very short book. It is about the single most plausible alternate reality to the Warren Commission study. So this book is a short, tough-minded piece. It is not loaded with a million references, does not regurgitate all of the old conspiracy. This gets right down to the point. What is the alternate reality to the Warren Commission? Is there one? What is the best, most plausible theory? So let's introduce, first of all, the Warren Commission narrative. The limousine, the motorcade, makes a strange right turn. Instead of going right down Main Street and keeping a certain velocity, which is part of the normal protection of a presidential motorcade, it turns right and comes to almost a halt at the Texas School Book Depository. It makes a left at the Daltex building that goes in front of the depository and then starts heading towards the grassy knoll. According to the Warren Commission, there are 3 shots that came from the depository window on the 6th floor. JFK was hit by 2 bullets. Governor Connally was hit by the same bullet that hit JFK. The 3rd bullet missed, and everybody kind of agrees to that. There were no other bullets, no other assassins besides Oswald, and after that, Oswald left the depository, was confronted by a policeman, shot and killed the policeman, and then went to the Texas Theater where he was arrested. After he was incarcerated, within 48 hours of his being captured, Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner, came and shot Oswald. And that's the Warren Commission story. Now, the majority of Americans did not believe that story when it came out in 1964. Now, since that time, there are 3 major books that have attempted to kind of rationalize the Warren Commission story. These are the Gerald Posner's Case Closed, Bill O'Reilly's Killing Kennedy, and Vincent Bugliosi's Reclaiming History. These 3 books are basically saying that the Warren Commission's story is accurate in large part. However, there were a lot of people who did not feel that that was true. Thomas Merton, Kenneth Rexroth, Irving Wallace, Ray Bradbury, Patty Chayefsky, Norman Cousins, Bertrand Russell, Arnold Toynbee, Thor Heyerdahl, President Charles de Gaulle thought it was phony. Warren Commission member Hale Boggs thought it was phony. Senator Sherman Cooper, Senator Richard Russell did as well. In addition, JFK's personal secretary felt that Kennedy was killed as a result of a conspiracy. Kennedy aides Dave Powers and Kenneth O'Donnell, who were present in Dealey Plaza, they thought it was the result of a conspiracy. So did Secret Service officer Gabby Kellerman. So Governor Connally is shot with Kennedy in the limousine, and he was asked, did he feel that Lee Harvey Oswald shot him? He said, absolutely not. I do not think for 1 second, or I do not for 1 second believe the conclusion of the Warren Commission. So the most important recipients of this information, however, were the American people. And in 2011, 75% of the American people did not believe the Warren Commission story. So that's a pretty strong indictment. And this is an attempt in this book and in this lecture to present you what actually did happen. And it's based on a number of sources. Besides that Conspiracy in Camelot encyclopedia that I wrote, I interviewed James Files, your grassy knoll gunman, over the course of 6 years. And he and I went back and forth, and I would ask him questions, and he said he didn't read conspiracy literature, so he didn't know some of the major books. But I swear every question I asked him, he got it right. And I originally thought, oh, he's just a phony and he's trying to get out of prison or something, because he's in prison for life for murdering a policeman. But he was a mafia hitman. And I would ask him questions that no one, unless they really knew Kennedy assassination literature, would know. I said, so who was Sam Saya? And what did he have to do with anything? He'd write back and say, I never liked drug dealers. Right on, absolutely right on the mark. How did he know that? You know, So I gradually began to believe that James Files, I could not find a mistake. I could not find a place where he was lying. I used to make up names of people just to think maybe I could get him to BS a little bit. But when I made up a name, he'd say, never heard of the guy. And so I really started to think that Files was a real piece of work, an authentic piece of work. There was another thing that happened since the publication of my original book. A spy master named E. Howard Hunt. Lots of people suspected him of involvement with Oswald, Dealey Plaza, the assassination, setting things up. He wrote a book before he died. It was hinting at a few things. Then his son came to his deathbed and filmed him and put it on YouTube. And it's his deathbed confession. And he says that Lyndon Johnson was the mastermind behind the assassination and that the CIA was involved. So his story is also, in a way, dovetails a bit with James Files' story. Now, in addition, there have been some really good, important authors who have appeared very recently. David Talbot, Douglas Horne, James D. Eugenio, James Douglas. And their stuff is also part of this approach. So here's where it starts. This is not an original idea. There are 5 authors who say this, but Lyndon Baines Johnson is the mastermind of the plot. And here's the reason why. First of all, Johnson was not liked by Kennedy. Kennedy was not liked by Johnson. The Kennedys called Lyndon Johnson Colonel Corn Pone and his wife Little Pork Chop. Okay, there was a lot of bad blood between these two guys. Now, the Kennedys didn't want Lyndon Johnson on the 1964 ticket. Bobby Kennedy's the Attorney General. Suddenly, all sorts of scandals are coming and haunting Lyndon Johnson. A scandal involving Fred Kroth, one of his friends. Bobby Baker, his right-hand man, is indicted and ends up going to prison. And Johnson thinks, if he talks, I'm finished. Billy Saul Estes, another buddy of Johnson, is indicted and he goes to prison. So Johnson is in a state of panic. He leaves Washington and goes to Dallas and goes to Texas and is kind of trying to stay out of the limelight. But that's when this assassination thing starts to grow. Johnson, we covered this bad blood between them. Johnson, by the way, believes that the Kennedys are behind these scandals that are brewing because they want to use it as grounds to get rid of Johnson on the 1964 ticket and get a different vice president. So Johnson is facing complete political ruin. So he has a mistress since 1948, Madeline Brown, and he tells his mistress the day before the assassination, after tomorrow the Kennedys will never embarrass me again. That's not a threat, that's a promise. Oh, wait a minute.
On the criminal investigation of Lee Harvey Oswald and determined him to be a murderer without a motive. If you take all of these other possible parties who could have killed the president and combined all their motives together, they wouldn't have as many as Lyndon Johnson himself. He had personal motives, he had economic motives, he had political motives. We start with motive. Then from there we go to opportunity. Lyndon Johnson was involved in planning the trip. It is without question.
So that's just one of many authors who have made this rather unoriginal accusation or indictment. Here's his mistress, short snippet.
Candy. Let's go back to the night before. When Johnson came out of the meeting, what did he say to you?
He was so angry. He had a violent temper when he was upset.
Well, let's use the exact words that he said to you. What did he say to you?
He grabbed me by the arm, and he had this deep voice. And he said, after tomorrow, those SOBs will never embarrass me again. That's no threat. That's a promise. And it startled me, really, because he was so ruddy-faced. I thought, oh, well, he really, something went on that shouldn't have gone on,
So, but although many authors have done this, nobody's really figured out how did he do it, okay? So this, by combining Files' comments and E. Howard Hunt's suddenly everything starts to make sense. The Johnson's involved, the CIA is involved, the mafia are involved. It's not three separate theories. It's one conjoint composite theory that explains this. So let's take a look at the CIA. There are four major figures, one of whom E. Howard Hunt says is the key figure. But there's a big issue. Although there were 47 people mentioned of CIA, there are the three major guys are very, very big CIA folks. And it's very difficult to determine, are they active co-conspirators with Johnson, or are they passive? Are they acquiescing to Johnson's plans rather than joining him in the plot? People like Oliver Stone say, no, they're active. But if you look carefully at the evidence is pretty thin that you can prove that they're active. But you certainly can find lots of evidence to say that they had covered things up. They didn't report. They were not transparent. They were protecting the agency. Here are the major figures. The first is Allen Dulles. He was with his brother John Foster Dulles under Eisenhower. He's a terribly hawkish right-wing person. He even suggested once to Kennedy that we bomb Russia preemptively as a nuclear first strike. Kennedy thought that suggestion was a form of madness. Dr. Strangelove. That's how Kennedy actually felt about it. But Allen Dulles was the head of the CIA. He was fired by Kennedy for the Bay of Pigs stuff, and he had a great deal of resentment towards Kennedy. By the way, after Johnson started the Warren Commission, guess who he asked to head up the Warren Commission? Allen Dulles. Okay, outside of Earl Warren, the most active member of the Warren Commission was a person that John F. Kennedy had fired and thought was mad. Richard Helms is the director of clandestine operations, a master spy, found guilty of contempt of Congress for withholding information from the American people about matters related to the CIA. James Angleton, considered a very paranoid person, the head of counterintelligence for the CIA, destroyed some very important documents related to the Kennedy assassination. He's in there too. However, despite these three, the key person is a man named William Harvey. He was in charge of black ops. He was a gun-toting drunk, really, but he had a very, very high position in the CIA. He was very close to mobsters because he often hired mobsters to carry out CIA operations. Now, Harvey has a friend, a close family friend from the mafia named Johnny Rosselli. They vacation together. They dine together. Harvey's daughter calls him Uncle Johnny. Johnny is close with all of the major mafia figures in the United States of America. So Johnson, Harvey, Rosselli, and this is how the mafia enters the picture. This is the syndicate. These are the major figures in the syndicate. Sam Giancana from Chicago, Santos Trafficante from Florida, Carlos Marcello from New Orleans, Tony Arcado from Chicago. Not too many people knew about Arcado. File says Arcado was really the brains behind this thing. So these guys want to get rid of Kennedy. Why? Because Robert Kennedy is prosecuting the mafia like no one has ever done. He got almost 700 people put away in the 3 years of the Kennedy presidency. The mafia is in a state of panic. They want to kill Bobby Kennedy. They're familiar with Jack. They're familiar with his father. But they say, if you kill Bobby, then Jack Kennedy, the President of the United States, will avenge his brother's death and destroy the mafia. Okay, so you have to kill the head of the snake. So there are a number of wiretaps that J. Edgar Hoover has, but he never tells Bobby Kennedy about what he knows. But these are amazing statements. Carlos Marcello says, don't worry about that little Bobby son of a bitch. He's going to be taken care of. The dog will keep biting you if only you cut off its tail. But if the dog's head were cut off, the entire dog will die. Santos Trafficante says, mark my word, that man Kennedy is in trouble, and he'll get what is coming to him. He's going to be hit. Giancani's brother writes a book many years later about how the CIA felt, how the mafia felt, that they were double-crossed they helped the Kennedys. Giancana sent a girl over for Jack, Judith Exner Campbell. She was a courier between the two of them. Bobby didn't know that she was a courier, but Jack's consorting with a mafia mall. So here's what Sam Giancana tells his brother. We took care of Kennedy. The hit in Dallas was just like any other operation we worked on in the past. The United States had a coup. It's that simple. The government of this country was overthrown by a handful of guys who did their job so damned well, only one American ever knew it happened. So this is then the picture of the high cabal that carries off a coup d'etat in the United States of America on November 22nd, 1963. Johnson at the top, 3 CIA guys. We don't know if they're active or passively involved, but William Harvey, according to E. Howard Hunt, directly connects to Johnson, and that directly connects to Rosselli, and that directly connects to the heads of all of the big mafia families in the United States. Okay? Now, there are intermediaries here. Oswald moves to New Orleans, and some very peculiar things happen. This is before we ever knew what was, this is before any absolute clear plans for Kennedy coming to Dallas were made. But Oswald is hanging out with some strange people. So say researchers who've been studying this question for 50 years, okay? Guy Bannister is the lead figure here. He is a private detective, a CIA agent. He has an office. All of these people are anti-communists. All of these people are connected either to the CIA or to the mob, Marcello's mob, or to the anti-Castro Cuban movement. Bannister is known for creating people with false IDs so that they will infiltrate left-wing organizations. And that's what they think they were doing with Oswald. E. Howard Hunt is a CIA agent who allegedly has an office in the same building as Bannister. Lauren Hall is one of many anti-Castro Cuban agents. He was a mercenary, like Sergio Arcacha Smith, who knew all of the anti-Castro people who were coming through New Orleans. David Ferry made a speech saying John F. Kennedy should be shot for betraying the Cubans who tried to overthrow Castro. He's connected to Marcello's underground organization. He was a pilot. David Atlee Phillips is a very dark, mercurial figure. People suspect him of being a person called Maurice Bishop. Even the new head of the CIA, McCone, who Kennedy replaced Allen Dulles with McCone. McCone didn't even know he worked for the CIA. So all of these figures are dealing with Oswald and sort of gradually setting Oswald up for something. Oswald is passing out leaflets in New Orleans. Fair play for Cuba. He's allegedly a member of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Trouble is, there aren't any members of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. The brochure he's passing out is stamped 544 Camp Street. That's Guy Bannister's address. Oswald meets a guy named Carlos Bringuer. They have a fist fight. They're photographed on television. They're arrested. It's a big brouhaha. Pro-Castro, anti-Castro. There's a lot of publicity. That's exactly what Bannister wants. So everybody says, Oswald was a Marxist, pro-Castro, and he had a fight with somebody who was on the opposite side of that question. Delphine Roberts, Guy Bannister's secretary, sees Lee Harvey Oswald, a lefty, in Guy Bannister's offices. And she said, "What's he doing here?" And he said, "He's with us." When Oswald met Bringuer before the brawl, he brought his Marine Corps manual to Bringuer and said he wanted to join the anti-Castro movement. Oswald, Bringuer said, then expressed support for the Cuban cause and offered either to help train men to oppose Castro or to go to Cuba himself to fight. So the Warren Commission people say this is all paranoia, this is all made up. These conspiracy buffs are trying to make up such weird. Oswald didn't know any of these people. He didn't know E. Howard Hunt or Bannister or Ferry or any of that. It's all Jim Garrison's paranoid fog that he's living in. Okay? That's the Warren Commission school. Why would Oswald, a Marxist communist, be hanging out with these people who are just the opposite of him? Well, someone says, well, sorry. By the way, Posner says, you can't prove any connection between Oswald and David Ferry. Oh, yes, you can. Here's a picture of teenager Lee Harvey Oswald in the Civil Air Patrol, which is being run by David Ferry. They absolutely did, in fact, know each other. According to testimony to Bannister's personal secretary, Delphine Roberts, Ferry and Oswald were frequent visitors to Bannister's office in 1963. She remembered Ferry as one of the agents. Many times when he came into the office, he used the private offices behind Bannister's, and I was told he was doing private work. I believed his work was somehow connected with the CIA rather than the FBI. There was a rumor that after the assassination that Oswald possessed David Ferry's library card. No one ever found it, but David Ferry got quite paranoid and tried to visit Oswald's landlady and retrieve his library card. I don't know. I don't think he ever succeeded. So what is Oswald thinking? Oswald tells his friend, Adrian Alba, I found my pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Interesting. So what is it? He thinks that he's involved in some kind of anti-Castro movement. He thinks this could be his future. He doesn't know what he's going to do yet, but he believes that he's involved with some important people. So those are the intermediaries. Sergio Arcacha Smith, E. Howard Hunt, David Ferry, Lauren Hall, Guy Bannister, and other people like Anthony Vesiano, who are not here. And David Atlee Phillips, a very, very important person, David Atlee Phillips. Now, what are they doing? They're beginning to set up Oswald with pro-Castro, pro-Soviet identities, okay, which is pretty easy to do. Number two, they're coordinating with the Chicago and New Orleans mafia, ultimately, where the hit squad and the parade route are slowly filtering down to this group of people. Because that was done in late September. Now we come to a point which is this is probably some of the most critical stuff here. Late September 1963, this is the time then that Dallas, the president is deciding to go to Dallas for sure, and the parade route is being worked on. Oswald moves to Dallas. Sylvia Odio, and on the last weekend of September, one thing or the other thing happens. Both cannot be happening. Sylvia Odio is 20 years old or 21 years old, living with her sister Annie, and her father is in prison in Cuba. She's against Castro, but she's a liberal. She's leftist. She's democratic. She's not a right-wing hawk. She'd like to see Castro go and a democracy appear. Three people come to her house. One guy is called Leon Oswald. The other is Leopoldo and Angelo. They talk about getting rid of Castro. They talk about eliminating Castro. And then after Kennedy is shot, Sylvia Odio faints, says, oh my God, the guy who killed Kennedy, that was Leon Oswald, the guy who came to my apartment. Oh my God. So the other option here is that did not happen with Sylvia Odio. Instead, Oswald gets on a bus and goes to Mexico City. He's carrying a revolver. He goes to the Cuban consulate, the Soviet consulate, bangs on their desks, acts like a maniac, says he's being persecuted in the United States, wants to get a visa, wants to go to Havana, wants to go back to the Soviet Union, needs permission. Everybody's going to remember this. He makes a total of 10 entries and exits into the Cuban consulate and the Soviet consulate in Mexico City. So, did he do that? So the Cuban consulate people say, we heard of a Lee Harvey Oswald, but The guy we saw on television, that's not the guy who came to our consulate. That was a different person. So this is a very difficult issue. Sylvia Odio faints, doesn't tell anyone. She tells a girlfriend. The girlfriend tells the FBI. The FBI investigates and says, oh my God, if he went to see Odio, he didn't go to Mexico City. J. Edgar Hoover didn't really believe that Oswald went to Mexico City. He thought the CIA was conning everybody. So a man comes forward named Loren Hall. There he is. And he's an anti-Castro Cuban mercenary, and he says, no, it wasn't Oswald. I was the person who visited Sylvia Odio, not Leon Oswald, okay? It was me. It was Loren Hall. Okay, but Sylvia Odio said, I never saw Loren Hall. I never met Loren Hall. No, I met Oswald. So 12 years after all of this is over, the Senate is investigating these matters, and they call Loren Hall to testify. He said, I'll testify under immunity from prosecution. And they said, okay, you've got immunity from prosecution. So he comes and he says he lied. He lied to the Warren Commission. He never met Sylvia Odio, and Sylvia Odio was basically telling the truth. Oh, well, that means Oswald never went to Mexico City. So that's why this is such an important story. Let's go back. Both Annie and Sylvia Odio said the person they saw in their apartment on that weekend in September was Lee Harvey Oswald.
One night I opened the door for 3 men that came to see one of my sisters. I opened the door. They were in a small hallway with bright lights overhead.
The taller man introduced the other 2 men. Leopoldo, he said that was his name. He introduced the American who was in the middle as Leon Oswald, and he introduced the one that seemed Mexican and spoke with a Mexican accent as Angelo.
And are you quite clear about it, that when those men visited your apartment, the American was introduced as Oswald?
The American was introduced as Leon Oswald. That would always be in my mind very clearly.
Now, Gerald Posner said, Sylvia Odio was under psychiatric care. She was hysterical. She had mental problems. You cannot trust her as a witness. Well, this is 40 years later, 2010, that interview you just had. They're still telling the same story. They didn't write any books. They're not trying to make any money. They never did. That story is true. And that is a very critical element. Now, here's how the assassination happens. First, according to the Warren Commission, Oswald is in the 6th floor depository window, shoots 3 shots, races down the stairs in 90 seconds after the last shot, because after 90 seconds, in walks Officer Marion Baker. He sees Oswald in the 2nd floor lunchroom drinking Coke and either buying Coke or drinking Coke. Takes 90 seconds. But he just said, I didn't see that Oswald was winded. But that's the Warren Commission story. He shoots the president, runs down, is confronted by Baker. Baker then goes up to look for the sniper, and then Oswald leaves the building. What actually happened? Well, it's a little more complex than that. What actually happened was a man named Chauncey Holt, who was a tramp, one of the 3 tramps that was arrested and then released. He brought phony Secret Service badges to this area. He didn't know why, he just did what he was told. Okay? All of the assassins are dressed in suit coats, not Oswald. All of the assassins are dressed in suit coats and carrying Secret Service ID badges so that they will always be seen as Secret Service folks. Now, instead of going down Main Street, the motorcade turns a very suspicious right turn and then a very slow left turn. Sheriff Bill Decker has 125 sheriff deputies, and he calls them all to stand down from the protection of the motorcade. Why? Because the Secret Service is going to handle all the security. So there are 125 deputies who are not protecting the presidential motorcade. General Cabell is a right-wing American general. He used to work for the CIA right under Allen Dulles. He thinks John F. Kennedy is a traitor to the United States of America. His brother Earl Cabell is the mayor of Dallas. It is thought by a number of researchers that General Cabell and their brother Earl have informed Bill Decker to call off the deputies who protect the motorcade, and who also reroute the motorcade so that it passes right in front of the depository where Lee Harvey Oswald has a job. So James Files is the grassy knoll gunman with his Remington Fireball. Johnny Rosselli and Charles Nicoletti are in the Daltex building, ready to go. Mac Wallace, LBJ's personal hitman, according to some researchers, is in the depository window. Lee Harvey Oswald is having lunch on the second floor in the lunchroom. So if you recall from the very first slide here, with Files talking, we see Kennedy's head fall violently backward. Now, in 1964, Dan Rather was the only person, plus maybe two or three others, who saw the Zapruder film. The American people didn't see the Zapruder film until a decade later. Dan Rather says that President Kennedy falls violently forward. Okay, now either Dan Rather is lying or he is seeing a Zapruder film that has been tampered with, because it's clear that the president falls violently backward. A projectile coming at 2,000 feet per second, which hits bone, throws you in the same direction, okay? And that's at frame 320 and 19. Kennedy goes directly backward, and everybody else is saying that his skull comes off in the back, and it's brain matters all over the place. A policeman who's riding behind him is so covered with blood and brain matter, the policeman, Hargis, thinks that he was hit himself. Okay, but the Warren Commission is covering that story up for all this period of time, 50 years. So Kennedy falls violently backward as a result of a frontal shot. So there are 50 witnesses who say the shots came from the front. The shots came from the grassy knoll. So an author named Thompson, groups all of the witnesses and says 52% of the witnesses in Dealey Plaza said the shots came from the front, from the grassy knoll, whereas only 39% of the witnesses said they came from the depository. Other authors come up with a different set, but there are at least 50 who say it came from the depository. There are at least 50 who say it came from the grassy knoll, and here are a few of them.
Headshot seemed to come from the right front. It seemed to strike him here, and his head went back, and all of the brain matter went out the back of the head. It was like a red halo, a red circle with bright matter in the middle of it. It just went like that. It was a terrible time. You cannot imagine seeing this. You knew it happened, but you didn't want to believe it. The particular headshot must have come from another direction besides behind him, because the back of his head blew off, and it doesn't make sense to be hit from the rear and still have your face intact. So he must have been hit from another position, possibly, in the front or over to the side. I really don't know where. But the back of his head blew off.
So I'm very dead certain at least one shot, including the one that took the president's skull off, had to come from the right front. And I'll stand by that to my death. Over my mother's grave.
So, Kenneth O'Donnell, Kennedy's aide, said, he was in the motorcade, I told the FBI what I had heard, 2 shots from behind the grassy knoll fence, but they said it couldn't have happened that way, and that I must have been imagining things. So I testified the way they wanted me to. I just didn't want to stir up any more pain and trouble for the family. Huh. So, thank you, Mr. O'Donnell, but what you did was you started 50 years of conspiracy research. So where was Oswald during this time? Well, Oswald was having lunch in the second floor lunchroom, and he was having a Coke there. So the Warren Commission said, oh, no. He was up there in the sniper's nest. He ran down in 90 seconds and casually acted like he was drinking a Coke when he was confronted by Officer Marion Baker. That's the official story. What has more likely happened is that the vice president of the Texas School Book Depository, named Carolyn Arnold, said she saw Oswald in the lunchroom at 12:15. The president is shot at 12:30. And Oswald's there at 12:15 eating lunch. James Jarman, an employee, said he saw Oswald there as late as 12:20 that afternoon. They asked Oswald, okay, if you were in the lunchroom and you weren't shooting the president and you were there for 15 or 20 minutes, who else came in the lunchroom when you were there, huh? Well, Oswald named 2 people, and he was correct. Now, what people don't seem to realize is that the motorcade was 5 minutes late. Oswald had no idea and no way of knowing the motorcade was 5 minutes late. So if he was in the lunchroom at 12:15, then he was in the lunchroom 10 minutes before the motorcade was supposed to arrive. Now, that's pretty nonchalant. I think I'll finish my lunch, have a Coke, and go upstairs and then shoot the president. But I think I want to finish my dessert right here. Okay, that's fictional. Okay, there was a book written by a man called The Girl on the Stairs. 2 women who were on the upper floors of the depository heard the whatever shots there were and raced down to see what happened. They came down the same stairs Oswald's was supposed to be coming down at exactly the same time. They didn't see anybody running down the stairs. There's a whole book on that subject. So, who are the shooters, or who was the shooter in the depository? Well, there's one good suspect, a CIA hitman named David Morales. Not too much proof of this, but he said to a friend in the 1970s, I was in Dallas when we got the son of a bitch, and I was in Los Angeles when we got the little bastard. David Morales. And he was identified by E. Howard Hunt as well. Another candidate is Mac Wallace, whose fingerprint, there was one fingerprint that was unknown by the Warren Commission, and it has subsequently been identified as Mac Wallace's by at least one researcher. Wallace had been arrested for murder. He was very close to LBJ, and people thought, and many have thought, that Wallace was LBJ's personal hitman. James Worrell is driving his motorcycle, parks it in the back of the depository. Oh, here's the president's coming. Here's shots, and he notices a man running out of the building in a suit coat, hurriedly. And he said, that was not Oswald that I saw, but there was a man in a suit coat running out of the building. So Worrell is a witness to somebody leaving the building in a very suspicious manner. James Worrell dies 2 years later, mysteriously in a motorcycle accident. So how did it, if none of the depository employees saw any strangers in the building that morning? That's the sniper's nest surrounded by boxes. The best idea here is that if Oswald didn't do it, then maybe the Wallace or Morales got into the building at night. There was some chicken found in that sniper's, so they must have had dinner, and maybe they just stayed there all morning long waiting for their prey. Or his prey. So these are the assassins. Charles Nicoletti to the top left, Mac Wallace in the middle, James Files, the man who actually killed the president with a frontal shot, David Morales, lower left, Johnny Rosselli, who accompanied Chuck Nicoletti, but I don't think he fired anything. Either he was afraid to, or he was just there for company. According to Files, he was there. So there's a murder going on. Oswald goes to his rooming house, comes back, changes clothes, grabs a revolver, behaves in a very paranoid way. I think it's starting to dawn on him that he's been set up. He's going to be a patsy. He is going to the Texas Theater. But he's confronted by Officer Tippit. According to James Files, Oswald didn't shoot Officer Tippit. Gary Marlowe, a mafia hitman, he was headed to the Texas Theater where he was supposed to meet Oswald and finish him off. Except Gary Marlowe is stopped by Officer Tippit, and Gary Marlowe just executes Tippit. 3 shots in the body, 1 shot in the head. Tippit didn't even have much of an opportunity to remove his weapon. It was an execution-style killing. Oswald never shot a single person in his life, but Gary Marlowe was the hitman, according to files. Now, why was Oswald killed? I mean, here we have this guy who went to Mexico City and all that, the commie, well, things were not fitting together. He said that he liked President Kennedy. He said under interrogation, nothing irritated me about the president. John Kennedy had a nice family. He said he'd never been to Mexico before other than Tijuana. Wait a second. We got this whole story prepared for you about the Cuban consulate and the communists and wanting to and being persecuted. And now he says he never went to Mexico City. This is not good. He was cool on Marxism. He said, the way you're treating me, I may as well be in Russia. That's no way for a Marxist to talk. They said, would you like to hide your face? He said, why should I hide my face? I haven't done anything to be ashamed of. Again, Oswald is not going to do well with the cover story that has been prepared by the conspirators. Oswald makes a call to a guy in North Carolina. 2 attempts. They didn't go through. John Hurt. Who was John Hurt? Researchers have looked it up. John Hurt in North Carolina worked for military intelligence. Ooh, why is Oswald calling somebody for help who's involved with military intelligence? We got to get rid of this guy.
Oswald walks his last mile. His assailant moves in from the right.
He's been shot. Oswald has been shot.
So Jack Ruby is the man who kills Lee Harvey Oswald within 48 hours of his arrest. Who is Jack Ruby? To the Warren Commission, he's a nightclub owner who didn't want to see Jacqueline Kennedy have to come back and be dragged through the legal proceedings of Dallas. And so he was sparing Jackie this grief. Really? Is that true? Okay, fine and dandy. Now, that's the cover story. But in reality, Jack Ruby was about as closely connected to the mob as anyone could be. He was Al Capone's courier. He had 9 prior arrests. He made so many long-distance calls in the 2 months before the assassination. When Robert Kennedy saw his phone records, he said, by God, Jack Ruby called everybody that I had called to testify when I was investigating the mafia, when I was head of the Rackets Committee. And the first visitor to Jack Ruby in prison was mafioso Joseph Campisi. We're going to take care of you, Jack. It's okay. Well, Jack wasn't taken care of, and he stayed in Dallas, in jail, and pretty soon he started to talk. He said, look, isn't it strange that Oswald should be fortunate enough to get a job in the Texas School Book Depository 2 weeks before? Only one person who could have had that information, and that man was Johnson, because he is the one who was going to arrange the trip, the only one who gained by the shooting. He blamed LBJ. So, the story continues. I mean, this alternate story that is developed in my book and that we're presenting here. Kennedy's body is examined by over 18 people in Parkland Hospital in Dallas. When the final autopsy in Bethesda, Washington, which was highly controlled and under the control of Johnson and his admirals, they wouldn't even allow Kennedy's personal physician to look at and be present during the autopsy in Washington, which is why he always felt there was a conspiracy. There were these 18 people who read the Warren Commission and said, those wounds were not the wounds that we saw. The wounds we saw were from a frontal shot that blew out the back of his head. They're not the wounds that they were recreated in the Bethesda autopsy. Okay, 18 people. Now, There's a whole legacy of strange deaths. Dorothy Kilgallen is a gossip columnist. She always breaks new stories, headlines. She got a secret interview with Jack Ruby. She went to New Orleans a few times. She said, I'm going to break the Kennedy assassination story wide open. And Dorothy Kilgallen suddenly dies of an overdose of sleeping pills. And her girlfriend, her best girlfriend, dies the same weekend. No notes are ever recovered, no recordings, no transcripts, nothing ever found of her research into the Kennedy assassination. David Ferrie is going to be indicted by Jim Garrison, the New Orleans prosecutor, for conspiracy in the killing of John F. Kennedy. Ferrie says, you know what this story does to me, don't you? I'm a dead man. From here on, believe me, I'm a dead man. You'll find out soon enough. You'll see. Ferrie died allegedly of a suicide. He typed the suicide note. And he died of a brain aneurysm. That's hard to do. His good buddy, Eladio Del Val, was an anti-Castro Cuban. Also a very anti-Kennedy. He's in Miami. He's hatcheted to death within 24 hours of David Ferrie's so-called suicide. Whoa. Gerald Holzer says, oh, this is all just coincidence. Really. Gary Underhill is a CIA agent. He says, Oswald is a patsy. They set him up. It's too much. The bastards have done something outrageous. They've killed the president. I've been listening and hearing things. I couldn't believe that they got away with it, but they did. Underhill told friends that he feared for his life. I know who they are. That's the problem. They know I know. That's why I'm here. I can't stay in New York. Gary Underhill shot himself behind the left ear. Ruled a suicide. Trouble is, Gary Underhill was right-handed. So to kill yourself, to commit suicide under your left ear, you have to take the gun and put it over here and blow your head off. It would be much better to do it this way, don't you think? Or this way? But he did it that way? Really? So, James Worrell, the man who saw a man running out of the depository in a suit coat, not Oswald, dies from a strange motorcycle accident. He's only 26. Bruce Pitzer is in the Navy, and he's a photographer, media guy. His job is to take slides and films of the Bethesda autopsy. He does. He also keeps some of the slides and films for himself, makes duplicates because he says, whoa. His friend said, oh, this was not a kosher operation. But nothing happens to Pitzer right away. But then Pitzer decides he's going to retire from the Navy and take his stash of films and slides with him, according to his buddy. Pitzer dies a mysterious suicide, too. He was going to be hired by a major network, his friend said, and he was going to probably reveal what he knew. Mary Meyer was a former wife of an angry CIA guy named Cordmeyer, who called her the whore of Babylon. They had a very contentious divorce. She takes up with John Kennedy as his mistress, and they were together right up until he was assassinated. He really liked her. And she reads the Warren Report and says, oh my God, what a lie, what a complete whitewash. That is not the truth. The Warren Report comes out in 1964, 10 months after the assassination. Mary Meyer says, I think I'm going to go public with this. This is just awful. And then she's worried for her life. And she tells her sister-in-law, watch out for my diary if something happens to me, okay? My diary is very important. Mary Meyer is murdered, shot once in the heart and once in the head. She's 46 years old. No one's ever prosecuted for the crime. The next day, her sister-in-law comes to the apartment to retrieve her diary, but someone has broken in, and they caught him in the act of breaking in. And the person they caught was James Jesus Angleton, the head of counterintelligence for the CIA. And he took the diary, and no one has ever seen the diary again. True story. Now, those are not the only strange deaths. There were, when people saw this Zapruder film and they saw that the president fell backwards, not forwards, as Dan Rather said, they wanted investigations. And there was a church committee, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and people were called to testify that had never been called to testify. And guess what happened? This is the highest incidence of murder of congressional witnesses in American history. People who were called to testify who all died between 1976 and 1978. Okay? Sam Giancana was called to testify. He was shot around the mouth 5 times as if to say, you keep your mouth shut. Okay? All of these deaths, suicides, murders, natural causes, suicides again, are all witnesses who either had testified or were going to testify. Even David Morales, the CIA hitman, died a mysterious death. I think it was 54, and he was on his way to testify and died mysteriously of a stomach flu. So I did, in Conspiracy in Camelot, I did a statistical analysis of these 74 deaths. I compared them to the epidemiological cause of death in 1963, just to see if there was, as Posner said, was it coincidence or was it not? Well, the number of suicides is like 5 times greater than the number of suicides in the general population. The number of the murders in this little sample of 74 people was 10 times greater than the rate of murder in the general population. The number of accidental deaths was more than twice what it is in the normal population. And the number of people who died from natural causes was 1/5 what it should have been. I mean, the average age of these people was like 54. So that was so highly statistically significant, it means that this did not happen as a coincidence. It had a statistical pattern which was highly significant and very indicative of a conspiracy. What others say? Jackie Kennedy thought that LBJ killed her husband, and she also said she believed LBJ killed Robert Kennedy. These are her released tapes that came out just a couple of years ago. Robert Kennedy secretly believed LBJ was involved. He said if the truth were known about Dallas, there would be blood in the streets. A Republican, Roger Stone, writes a book and said LBJ had it done. Mob, Hoover, all in on it. So 2 hours after John Kennedy is dead, Lyndon Johnson takes the oath of office, and one strange researcher takes a photograph 1 second later, and Lyndon Johnson turns to Congressman Albert Thomas, and there this guy says the most revealing wink of the 20th century. Now that's the theory. There are strengths and weaknesses, so let's not get too excited. Here are some of the weaknesses about this theory. First, the CIA evidence against Helms, Angleton, and Dulles. Were they active co-conspirators, or were they passively acquiescing to Johnson's process? The evidence points, I think, in the more passive direction. But there are people like Oliver Stone and Jim Garrison who say it's active, but that's more hearsay than it is solid empirical evidence. Secondly, the Tippit shooting, there are witnesses, there are paraffin tests, there are ballistics that point in the direction of Oswald, and they're not easily thrown out and dismissed. Some of that is pretty serious stuff. So that's something that has to be looked at. Now, when you start talking about the strengths of this theory, they are absolutely overwhelming. I kid you not. Okay? Well, let's just review. The book goes into a thorough description, and I'm going to try to do this as condensed as I can. LBJ's incriminating comments to his mistress certainly is a strength of this theory. 50 witnesses pointing to the grassy knoll. Before we said, oh no, those 50 are wrong and these 30 or 60 are right. Now everybody's right in this theory because he was hit with crossfire and all of the witnesses are reporting real things that happen. You don't have to take 50 people and throw them out of the database. Those 50 people, a few seconds after the assassination, are all orienting themselves towards the grassy knoll. The officer is running towards the grassy knoll. People are looking at the grassy knoll. That's where James Files fired his frangible bullet that blew off the back of the president's head. There's an acoustic study. In the 1970s, a dictabelt appears. It was from a motorcycle radio that had been left on, and it recorded all of the shots that went on. It was sent out to one acoustics firm. They said more than 3 shots, and the government said no, 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 echoes. And another acoustics firm from the American Acoustical Society of America said probably as many as 5 shots. Okay, you can tell the difference when you do an analysis between an echo and a gunshot. There are 24 different fingerprints of a gunshot. Well, that corresponds rather perfectly to this theory. This theory says 3 shots came from the depository. 1 shot came from Nicoletti in the Daltex building that hit the president in the throat. And the fatal shot comes from the grassy knoll that hits Kennedy in the temple, hits and drives him back, not forward. So 5 shots. Here's the first theory that fits the acoustic evidence like a glove. Okay, instead of the kind of magic bullets that the Warren Commission was trying to say, well, 1 bullet did all this damage. There are witnesses who place Oswald in the lunchroom. Well, how could he be in the lunchroom just 10 or 15 minutes before he assassinated the president? How does he do that? How does he stay that? Well, he just never left the lunchroom, okay? He was not involved in this, all right? He was just the scapegoat. And that's a very strong point in this theory. The mysterious death of Mary Meyer, Dorothy Kilgallen, David Ferry, Eladio Duval hatcheted to death within 24 hours, all a coincidence, impossible to believe. Okay, simply too crazy that all those mafia murders are before they testify. All of that is supposed to be coincidence. This theory says not coincidence, all part of the same process. Photos of Oswald and Ferry together, they did know each other. Okay, there is tangible empirical evidence that it is not simply the wanderings of paranoid conspiracy researchers. James Files' confession points to the mafia. Howard Hunt's confession points to Johnson and the CIA. Together, they make perfect sense through William Harvey and David Atlee Phillips. The evidence of a frontal shot through the autopsy, through the witnesses, is incredibly good. Before the Warren Commission had to do all these gymnastics to say no, 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 to change the autopsy results. Now the 18 people in Parkland Hospital are corroborated. And this theory says, yes, they saw something which is in fact true. Johnson's behavior and motives, I developed this more in the text. Let's just take a peek of this. Johnson's goes to a senator's office, his buddy. He says in the front of this senator, I'm not going to swear, but he talks to this senator in the presence of a lobbyist. This is when he's still in Washington, when the Bobby Baker scandal is coming down, when he's worried that Bobby Baker's going to talk. He said, John, that son of that blah, 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 Bobby Baker is going to ruin me. If that so-and-so talks, I'm going to land in jail. I practically raised that blah, 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 and now he's going to make me the first vice president of the United States to spend the last days of my life behind bars. Johnson was in hot water. According to one Johnson biographer, if Jack Kennedy had not been murdered, the Baker investigation would not have ended. If Jack Kennedy had not been murdered, the Baker scandal would have either destroyed or tarnished Johnson's image so completely that he would not have been on the 1964 ticket. If the president had not been slain, the truth about LBJ may have put him in prison, as his grandmother predicted, rather than into the White House. So that's another strength of this theory. Now there are other examples of government conspiracy. People say, no, the mafia did it. Great. The mafia did do it. But how does the mafia hide documents? How do they redact documents in the government? How does the mafia have that much political pressure and that much reach that they can have documents censored or destroyed? A government destruction of documents implies government complicity. Okay? So take a look at this. This is there are 64 examples of this. And here's one. This is a document written by the FBI about Lee Harvey Oswald in 1959. It's so heavily redacted you can't make any sense out of it. It was released in 1990. Why, after 47 years, does the government hide this kind of stuff? What is it hiding from the American people? That this was part of a 32-page report, and that was the only page that was released. During the Warren Commission hearings, Alan Dulles is presiding. It's a secret executive session, and the idea was that maybe Oswald had been a paid informant of the FBI. Alan Dulles said, I think this record ought to be destroyed. It was destroyed. However, an original court reporter's tape was later recovered, and the transcript was made from that tape after a long legal battle brought by Harold Weisberg. And that's how we found out that Alan Dulles said, let's destroy some more evidence. So there's a final strength of this theory, and that is lots of people have confessed over the years, but they pointed in different directions. Now you realize they're all pointing in the same direction. For example, here are comments made. Jack Ruby says LBJ did it. So under whodunit, it points to Johnson. James Files says that the Mafia and the CIA did it. Now we have the Mafia, the CIA, and Johnson, because this theory has combined all three of them, and now everything falls into place. David Morales says we got that SOB. That's the CIA. E. Howard Hunt says it was Johnson and the CIA. Okay, fine. Frank Regano, the attorney for Santos Trafficante, goes to Santos Trafficante on his deathbed and says, who killed Kennedy? Santos says, Carlos fucked up, meaning Carlos Marcello, meaning the Mafia. Marcello, the night that Kennedy is killed, he goes out to dinner and tells Hoffa's attorney, he says, you tell Hoffa he owes me. He owes me big. Whoa. That points to the Mafia. Robert Kennedy and Jackie say it's Johnson. Now, so if you look under the whodunit column, you see Johnson, Mafia, CIA. And now all of this evidence makes sense. So this theory has a lot going for it, believe me. Here is a conclusion from my book. I'm going to read it to you. It's not very long. Okay? President Johnson, aided and abetted by the CIA, conspired with and conscripted the American Mafia to assassinate the President of the United States on November 22, 1963. The theory, if true, deeply undermines what common rank-and-file Americans believe. It violates every sacred canon that our country is a transparent, open, democratic, civil country and governed by the rule of law. Instead, it portrays the United States of America as little short of a banana republic where power, guns, mobsters, murder, deceit, corruption, assassination, hitmen, and brazen coups d'etats determine the essential narrative of a people's history. So, before concluding, I would like to make a personal epilogue. Yes, I'm impressed by all this evidence, and it just, to me, starts to really fall into place. But I'm ambivalent. Like, I have no particular vested political interest in the outcome. I'm interested in the truth. And if someone said, this is wrong, this is right, I could easily change my mind and say, what do you know? Maybe Oswald was up there in the 6-4. Maybe he ran down in 90 seconds. I'm not invested in that. But I want to share with you the most important piece of evidence. And this is for me personally. You may find that the James Files confession is more impressive. But this is the most impressive single piece of evidence, the Odio story. Why? Sylvia Odio is 20 years older, 21. She says she met Oswald on the weekend he was supposed to be in Mexico City. 40 years later, she's videotaped on YouTube saying the same thing with her sister. She's not a psychiatric case. She's not hysterical. She hasn't been in mental hospitals her whole life. She didn't write any bestsellers. She didn't try to capitalize. She's still telling the same story. Leon Oswald was Lee Oswald, and he came to her house. And Lauren Hall said, no, it was me. Who was Lauren Hall representing? He said that he lied under immunity from prosecution. He said he lied. He was covering for what? For whom? Well, for the conspirators. That's for whom. Because Oswald never went to Mexico City. And if he never went to Mexico City, that whole story of banging on the desks and demanding this and the notorious, all that was made up, fabricated, frame up. So if that's true, and if Oswald never went to Mexico City, that means that somebody was fabricating evidence, right? So if they're fabricating evidence there, why not assume they're fabricating evidence there and there and there and everywhere? So there is evidence that Oswald had a palm print put on the rifle. No fingerprints, but a palm print. His mother said they put that there after he was dead. You know, if you believe that the Mexico City story is a hoax, then you could easily believe that Oswald's mother is right and that they did put his palm print on that rifle. There were eyewitnesses, one who saw Oswald in the window. First he said he didn't know, and then he said he did know. Well, if the Mexico City story is phony, how about all these other stories being phony? How can you avoid that conclusion? That's why the Odio story is so critically important to me. So I want to thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'll say goodbye at this point. Take care.